In 1941, the Luftwaffe ruled the air. Over France and the Low Countries, its fighters drove British bombers back and cut American raids from the sky. To Germany's pilots, every enemy aircraft looked fragile. And then they heard rumours of a new American fighter, so large that they laughed. They called it a flying tractor. They were half right. It was built for power, not beauty, and its name was Thunderbolt. The Thunderbolt was born not in combat, but on paper. In 1940, as Europe burned, the US Army Air Corps asked for a fighter that could escort bombers beyond enemy lines, fast, armed and self-sufficient. At Republic Aviation in Farmingdale, engineer Alexander Kartveli, a Georgian émigré who had fled Bolshevik Russia, designed a machine unlike any before it. He refused to chase lightness. Instead, he designed for survival. Kartveli chose the largest radial engine America could build, the Pratt Whitney R-2800 double Wasp, an 18-cylinder beast producing over 2,000 horsepower. To feed it, he added a massive turbo supercharger housed behind the cockpit, linked by ducts and turbine pipes that ran through the fuselage like arteries. The prototype, the XP-47B, weighed over 8 tons, twice as much as the Spitfire it would fly alongside. Its designers called it a brute with brains. Its critics called it impossible. But Republic's engineers believed that in modern war, durability was a weapon. The heart of the Thunderbolt was the R-2800 double Wasp, the same engine that powered the F-6F Hellcat and later the F-4U Corsair. Each cylinder was a precision-forged monolith of aluminium and steel, capable of withstanding pressures that would shatter smaller engines. Its rear-mounted turbo supercharger compressed thin, high-altitude air and fed it back into the engine at manifold pressures unheard of in 1941. That system required a maze of ducts and intercoolers, adding weight but granting the P-47 its greatest weapon, power at altitude. At 30,000 feet, where most fighters gasped for air, the Thunderbolt still roared. It could dive faster than any propeller aircraft in the war, a plunging mass of steel and fire that no Messerschmitt could outdive without shearing its wings. Test pilots soon realized it was not just fast, it was indestructible. Bullets that would tear through light fighters merely scarred the Jug's armoured skin. Its fuel tanks self-sealed. Its engine could run with cylinders shot away. What Kartveli had built was not a racer. It was a survivor. When the Thunderbolt first appeared over occupied France in mid-1943, German pilots laughed. To them it looked bloated, a bomber masquerading as a fighter. The Luftwaffe's Bf-109s and Fw-190s could climb faster, turn tighter, and for a moment they seemed invincible. But what they did not yet know was how the P-47 fought. American pilots learned quickly, never turn with the Germans, dive and strike. The Thunderbolt's terminal velocity was nearly 600 miles per hour. In a plunge, its mass became a weapon. German fighters tried to follow and were torn apart by their own speed. From above, the Jug's 8.50 caliber Browning machine guns ripped through cockpits and wings with a hurricane of fire. By the autumn of 1943, laughter had turned to caution. The Thunderbolt was earning its nickname, the Jug Heavy, unglamorous, unstoppable. The Thunderbolt's true trial came not over France, but deep inside Germany. In late 1943, the 8th Air Force began daylight bombing campaigns against the Reich's industrial heart, targets at Regensburg, Schweinfurt and Munich. At first, B-17 and B-24 crews flew beyond the range of their escorts. Losses were horrific. The Thunderbolt was ordered to push further, to go where its fuel gauges feared to fall. engineers answered with external fuel tanks hung beneath the wings, slippery drops that could be jettisoned before combat. With them, the P-47 reached Berlin's threshold. The pilots of Zemke's Wolfpack and Don Blakesley's 4th Fighter Group turned the Jug into an airborne bodyguard. They called it riding shotgun for the fortresses. The Luftwaffe struck from above with FW-190s and ME-109s. The Thunderbolts met them head-on, shedding their tanks and diving into the German formations. In the roar of 50 caliber fire, the balance shifted. For every Jug that fell, 5 Messerschmitts went with it. P-47 pilots developed a style of war as distinct as their machine. They used altitude as ammunition, climb, dive, strike and zoom away before the enemy could recover. Major Francis "Gabby" Gabreski perfected the method, claiming 28 victories before he was shot down just days before D-Day. His wingman, Robert Johnson, once flew home with his canopy jammed, engine riddled, and flak holes through the wings. The Jug brought him back. German intelligence briefings began to warn pilots, "Do not dive with Thunderbolts." The Luftwaffe's margin of superiority was gone. Fuel shortages, inexperienced cadets, and the Jug's inexhaustible engine shifted the air war forever. By spring 1944, the Thunderbolt had flown over 500,000 sorties. It was no longer a laughingstock. It was a regime killer. With the arrival of the P-51 Mustang, the Thunderbolt's role shifted. The Jug no longer had to fly deep escort. Its range was limited even with tanks. But what others saw as a weakness, commanders saw as an opportunity. Beneath its broad wings, the Thunderbolt could carry a ton of ordnance. Bombs, rockets, napalm, and even drop tanks filled with incendiary gel. The Jug descended from the stratosphere to the hedgerows. During Operation Cobra and the breakout from Normandy, P-47 squadrons obliterated German columns trapped on French roads. Its 8 Brownings chewed through tanks, locomotives, and convoys. Pilots said the Jug's guns sounded like tearing canvas, a steady metallic roar. German soldiers called them the Screaming Jugs. Where they appeared, the front line collapsed. Through the summer of 1944, P-47 groups became the air hammer of the Allied advance. They swept ahead of Patton's Third Army, cutting rail lines and smashing bridges. When Allied infantry called for help, it was usually a Thunderbolt that answered. The Jug earned a new nickname among ground troops, the tank with wings. Its pilots learned to fly by instinct, swooping through flak fields at treetop height. By the time the Allies crossed the Seine, German air defences were in ruins. The Luftwaffe could no longer contest the skies. Its pilots were dying faster than they could be trained. The Thunderbolt had fulfilled its destiny, from escort to executioner. In December 1944, the Western Front froze. The Ardennes forest filled with fog and snow as Hitler launched his final gamble, the Battle of the Bulge. For days, the weather grounded Allied aircraft. Tanks advanced through white silence. Then, on Christmas Eve, the clouds lifted. The first sound German soldiers heard was the growl of radial engines. P-47s poured through the breaks in the overcast, strafing, rocketing, bombing every column that moved. Pilots flew 10-12 sorties a day from forward strips carved out of frozen fields. Fuel trucks froze solid. Mechanics used blowtorches to free control surfaces. But when the Jugs flew, the counter-offensive died. In 3 days, Thunderbolts destroyed more than 1,500 vehicles, hundreds of guns, and cut the German fuel supply to pieces. The Bulge ended not with tanks meeting tanks, but with Jugs burning the roads black. Behind every Thunderbolt was a man who refused to quit. They came from farms, factories, universities, and learned to master 8 tons of steel and flame. Francis "Gabby" Gabreski, son of Polish immigrants, became America's top ace in Europe. Robert S. Johnson survived 258 combat missions, once returning home with 21 cannon holes in his fuselage. Hubert Zemke, leader of the 56th Fighter Group, Zemke's Wolf Pack, shaped tactics that every pilot copied thereafter. They treated the P-47 not as a machine, but as a living companion. It could dive faster, strike harder, and take more punishment than any other fighter in the sky. When fuel was low, they glided home on empty tanks. When flak tore through the wings, they limped across the channel. If they made it back to England, they said, the Jug had carried them in its arms. By spring 1945, the sky over Germany was Allied territory. The Thunderbolt had become an aerial artillery corps, smashing rail yards, power stations, and convoys fleeing east. Its pilots flew from makeshift strips only kilometers behind the infantry. Every sortie shortened the Reich's breath. In the last months, there was nothing left to challenge them. Me-262 jets darted through occasionally, but even they feared the Jug's diving charge. One hit from its Brownings could shatter a jet's fragile frame. When the guns finally fell silent, the Republic Thunderbolt had flown over 1 million combat sorties and dropped 132,000 tons of bombs, more than any other fighter in history. The machine Germany had mocked had ended its war. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, Thunderbolts lined airstrips from Normandy to Bohemia, scarred, mud-streaked, and still ready to fly. Many pilots refused to leave them. They walked the rows, touching the bullet-pocked skins as if saying goodbye to a friend. The war was ending, but the machine had one more battle: obsolescence. Jets were arriving. The Lockheed P-80 Shooting Star was already in Europe. Compared to it, the Thunderbolt was an iron giant from another age. Yet Republic Aviation did not let it fade. They refined it into the P-47N, with longer wings and greater range for the Pacific. Those Jugs escorted B-29 superfortresses over Japan and bombed airfields on Iwo Jima until the final day of the war. The P-47 had outlasted the enemy that mocked it and stood ready for the next war before the first ended. The design philosophy that created the Thunderbolt did not die with its propeller. Kartveli and his team at Republic carried it forward into jets. First the F-84 Thunderjet, then the F-105 Thunderchief. Each shared the same DNA: massive engine, heavy armor, and a pilot protected by power. Decades later, the Air Force revived its name for the A-10 Thunderbolt II, a low-flying tank killer with a steel titanium cocoon around its pilot and a cannon that roared like 8 Brownings merged into one. From Europe's fields in 1944 to the deserts of the 21st century, the idea endures. Survivability is the supreme weapon. The Thunderbolt taught engineers that machines could be both brutal and beautiful in their function, that strength, not speed alone, defines victory. The Luftwaffe had mocked the Thunderbolt as a lumbering tractor. History remembers it as a Juggernaut with wings, a machine forged not to outturn the enemy, but to outlast him. Its engineers proved that power and endurance could be designed as carefully as speed and grace. Its pilots proved that courage can be measured in metal as well as flesh. From the R-280's growl to the whine of a jet turbine, every modern fighter owes a whisper to the Jug.